Hi, I'm your host Garrett Van Team, and today I spoke with ex-Soviet spy, alias Jack Barsky. That was his name while he was undercover for over a decade in the United States. Jack has been on numerous podcasts and shows, and one's much bigger than mine. For the chronology of his stories, I recommend the Lex Friedman and Camp Gagnon podcasts. For an in-depth look at the psychology of a spy's mindset, I recommend the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. But if you want to hear questions that no one else has asked, well, you're watching No Man's Friend.
And one thing that it took me quite a while to realize and understand, all ideology is dangerous. You lose your character as a human individual. I am no fan of Zelensky, and I tell you why. It's called the military-industrial complex. Follow the money.
Jack, I was wondering if you could first tell me about your upbringing in Germany, since you were a very notable Soviet spy, but you're not Russian. So I was wondering if you could explain the world that you came up in.
That's right. It had a lot to do with the fact that I was born 4 years after the end of World War II. So particularly East Germany was very impoverished because when the Soviet troops moved in, what wasn't already destroyed during the end of the war, they took away as reparations. They even dismantled railroad tracks and stuff like that. And there was poverty to go around. You know, there was a lot of malnutrition in the cities. They didn't have enough food. Luckily for me, I grew up in the country, so there were always potatoes available. And I have a picture of myself when I was about 11 years old. I was thin as a rail. And a friend of mine many years later told me that we were known as potato babies because we were malnourished. I never experienced hunger, but you know, again, I was developmentally behind, caught up, by the time I went to high school, the food was better. The other thing that really had an impact, there was the medical treatment that we got was fundamentally almost non-existent. I mean, there were no drugs available to deal with like the strep throat to minimize the effects of a flu or a cold. We had to just live through it. And my God, that I remember still today that my doctor hurt me several times, really hard. One time he cauterized a wound at the bottom of my left foot, on the sole of my foot. It was a pretty deep wound. I had stepped into some glass. And he cauterized that wound without anesthesia. It was painful. It was all tough love, okay? And one thing that took me quite a while to realize and understand, the one thing that as a child, as a young child, you're looking for that from your parents particularly was emotional love. You know, hugging, kissing, affirming you. It was all tough love. It was like discipline. You perform and then you get rewards. And believe it or not, in my extended family, so there were 2 sets of grandparents, 3 sets of aunts and uncles, and my father and mother. In my entire youth, I never once heard the words "I love you" spoken when I could hear. I never saw my parents hug, kiss, and so I didn't get any hugs and kisses, and I didn't get any "I love yous."
What was your concept of affection then?
I didn't have one. That's a good question. And that's a question I've never been asked. That made me think. I didn't know that existed. I just knew that in order to do well with my parents, I had to get good grades. They were both teachers. And my father was actually, in middle school, he was the principal of the school that I attended. That put extra pressure on me. So I had to get good grades, which, I managed. It was not a problem. And then I had to do chores. So I didn't know affection. I knew appreciation. I got some money. I got paid a couple of coins when I got the coal from that we used to burn to heat our place from the cellar, that kind of stuff. But it was all performance, reward, and a story.
It's a little hard to picture this world since during World War II, Germany was a powerhouse. At least that was part of the perception they put out. They had movies, they had the massive architecture. So none of that was around during your upbringing.
No, simply whatever architecture may have been left over in the cities, and the big cities were, a lot of them were pretty much destroyed. There may have been, cities in the east, in the southeast. I think Munich may have been left alone for quite some time, but in the east, Berlin was destroyed. Dresden, the most beautiful city that we had, was all ruins. And and I grew up in a village, and then in a small town, and the Soviet army just passed by there. So there wasn't a lot of destruction. The good news was, as a result, I actually grew up in a nice apartment that was part of a school building that wasn't touched, and then in a half of a house in the country. So we also had a garden and a backyard, and so in many respects I was better off than the city dwellers. But it was still, at Christmas time, I usually got presents that I didn't like fresh underwear, and maybe one toy. Right. So and this was normal because my friends were just as quote unquote well off as I was.
So relatively, you understood that you were kind of all equal.
Yeah, absolutely. All equal. There was nobody better off. Now, there and there were a couple of private businesses, but I didn't think they were better off either. So we had a butcher and we had a baker, and we had somebody who repaired plumbing and stuff like that. There was no car mechanic because nobody owned a car.
Well, what did you guys do? Maybe this is the wrong word to use, but what did you guys do for fun? Or was there anything maybe that you actually remember fondly about your growing up?
Okay, you had to be inventive. Okay, before I received a soccer ball, soccer was the big thing to do because you can do it without, you just go find some grass, a lawn, and you kick the ball. Before I had a soccer ball, I don't know what we kicked, but I played hockey. So I took I cut off a crooked piece of wood, and then I found something that I could hit against the wall. Okay, and I played by myself. Um, Also, when I learned to read fluently in first grade, I started reading a lot, fairy tales, anything I could get my hands on. I also, because let's say it was winter time or it was raining outside, you couldn't go next door. Your playmates were not readily available, so I played board games by myself. I had little teams that competed with each other. So this sort of prepared me for loneliness as a spy because I knew that I could handle being pretty isolated because I was as a child, and that was not a big deal. Uh, and so then when I got a ball, we played soccer. I played against my brother who was 1 year younger than I, and his friend, and I had to bribe him to play against me because I was a lot taller and more athletic. But we made do. We made do.
Okay. And then you said that you were potentially slightly in jest, but you said you were mostly raised on potatoes or low nutrient foods. So you were a bit
Yeah,
malnourished in that respect, but you were
yeah.
actually ahead when it came to ability to think.
Now, there's also something called DNA. I I was born with a highly functioning brain, and I was born with a curiosity, always trying to find something out. So that made me read a lot. And so in school, middle school was way below my capabilities. I have testimony from ex-classmates that I was always doing something on the side, and it gave the impression to the teachers that I wasn't paying attention, and that, so they were trying to catch me. They never did. I had two things going on at the same time. It's not bragging. This is not something I developed. It's not something I worked on. It was something that was given to me at birth.
Were there any ideological tendencies left over from the previous administration in Germany? Like how much
From
of
the
that was
Nazis?
prevalent? Yeah.
From the Nazis, not obvious. The eastern part of Germany was subject to radical denazification. The western part, not so much. The United States and the Allies allowed some marginal ex-Nazis to persist because they were very valuable in rebuilding the country. Such as there was this guy Wernher von Braun who was the number one developer of nuclear energy in Germany. He was moved to the United States. That did not happen in East Germany. They were very radical. Even teachers who had some affiliation with the Nazi Party, not even members, they were replaced. Very radical. However, here's something that only occurred to me most recently. There was a cultural heritage that the communists actually continued. Like, you look at the way the East German military was dressed in March, it was just like the Nazis. You look at the mass events that we eventually organized. They could have been like mass meetings, of the society for, the athletic society that we had. They're just like Chinese today. Like dictatorships do that, mass events. And so, but as far as, raw Nazi ideology like racism, for instance, there was no anti-Semitism, there was no racism of any kind, and there was a diversion from the role of the female played under Nazism. The female was supposed to take care of the family, like today Christians are still believing. In communism, that same happened in the Soviet Union. There was equality of the genders, which really killed the women because they all were required to have a job, and they kept on taking care of the family. So, good question.
It's very
And
equal.
This is already number 2 that nobody ever asked me. Congratulations.
Well, I'm curious about that because I know that from World War One, and this could just be my public education here in the States, but I remember they said from World War number 1 to 2, there was like a growing, almost like resentment in the German people because they lost World War One. And I never understood if that was
correct.
just, that is correct.
That is absolutely correct. I think it was the Treaty of Versailles, did a lot of damage because it forced Germany to admit that Germany was the only one guilty of that war, which that's an exaggeration. Most of the guilt was with Germany, and it put a lot of restrictions on Germany to become a well-functioning country again, and that is what actually allowed Hitler to come to power. You're absolutely right.
So it's interesting then that all dissipates within like one more war, one more generation.
And it was replaced in East Germany with a romantic notion that communism would save us all and be the bright and shiny future. As you probably know, the communist ideal is very romantic. It has a romantic component to it that is very, very easy to sell. never works, has never once worked in the history. That even there were some revolutions, and I checked recently with somebody who grew up in Cuba and is roughly my age. Uh, and I was guessing that Castro was actually started out as a romantic, and he meant it, and he turned it, he became a dictator. Every single successful revolution that had communism as a heading turned into a dictatorship. So, and yet the romantic notion of communism still persists today. It's because the rationale behind this, well, they didn't do it right. We're going to do it right. No, you can't. It doesn't work.
I had that as one of my questions. I wanted to know what your annoyance was with that persistence, because I hear that all the time, that on one side of the debate, someone will list 17 countries where they tried communism and failed, and then the guy will just respond, well, none of them did true communism. What's different between the failing states and true communism, or is that just a bad talking point?
There is no such thing as true communism as Marx envisioned, simply because all the revolutions, and these are revolutions, you don't evolve into a communist society. You know, capitalism is what it is. It may become an oligarchy, but you don't evolve into where equality is the headline. It just doesn't work, because we by nature we are not equal. We may have equal opportunities, but we are not equal, and the outcome will result in failure. Because in East Germany, they tried it, in Russia they tried it, and the economy just was terrible. Okay, it doesn't work. So communism can only be attempted via a revolution, and that requires a little bit of force, and sometimes a lot of force. So once you come to power using force, how do you stay in power with force? And so you build a hierarchy. You have a strong, forceful government hierarchy that makes sure that it stays in power, because they're convinced that they're the only answer to the question, and they can still rationalize that, even though eventually they like it up there. So it's a logic of that has a lot to do with human nature, that this doesn't work, and that is why I'm jumping ahead of myself here. That is why I so admire the wisdom of the founding fathers of the United States, understanding that this tendency to turn into an evil sort of dictatorship can be managed. It cannot be abolished. The nature of man is what it is, and we all have the seed of deception and evil in us. Most of us can manage it very well, but very often the ones that wind up at the top haven't managed it very well. So, and the United States is the only country that didn't grow organically. It was created, and it was created in such a way that it lasted. It was very successful for many, many decades, and still is doing pretty well. But we are in a little bit of danger to go away too far from the constitutional concept.
Well, since we're in modern day, I'm curious, what do you think about what's going on with the U.S. right now? And we're coming up 30 days, well, actually less, on the election.
I'm not going to make a political statement. Okay, I'm not, because I believe there are flaws in both parties. I think the flaws on the left are more evident, and particularly what my problem with the left is incompetence. They're doing things that do damage, and will eventually wind up doing damage to themselves and their children. and the people that they care about. Is incompetence. So there's not as much incompetence in the Republican Party, but for instance, when it comes to foreign policy, I believe they're incompetent as well. I
If
don't
there was
want
a specific point on that, just to help illustrate it for me, what would
specific point
be?
is how to deal with Russia. Lack of understanding of what I consider the Russian national DNA, and that is the yearning that the Russians always have had for a strong man, may that be a czar, may that have been Lenin, Stalin, or Putin, to protect them from invasions that have happened throughout Russian history. And so for us, for NATO to move closer, physically closer to the Russian borders, that gives Vladimir Putin a great instrument to stay in power, even though the economy in Russia is not doing very well. There's still a lot of poverty. They're still not too far outside of Moscow. There are villages without electricity. Yet Putin is able to stay in power. We gave him that strong argument. And so I don't know why there's nobody in the United States government who understands that. Now, by the way, the two most important, the most successful national security advisors were European in origin. Zbigniew Brzezinski and the German one, what's his name? It'll come to me later, but he was very well known. He advised Ronald Reagan, but a few other presidents. So people who were born in the United States and got nothing but public education, no matter at what level, do not have a good understanding of many other cultures in the world, and particularly what is most important here today is the Russian culture.
I've heard people like RFK Jr. speak about that, and he seems to illustrate more of the Russian perspective in the manner that you've spoken about. I don't know if you're familiar with his statements on it, but he's talked a lot about the moving of the NATO line 1,000 miles further than it should have.
Yeah, well, good for him. And maybe instinctively Donald Trump has that notion, even though the way he communicates his stance towards the dictators, I think he thinks like if he makes them compliments, they're easier to get along with. He doesn't mean it that when he said, I really think that Vladimir Putin is doing a great job in Russia. He doesn't mean that, but he doesn't have that. Nobody ever tells him that this is so easily misinterpreted. I got along really well with a guy from North Korea. We were really best friends. No, you weren't. The two of you have way too big an ego to even spend a lot of time in the same room together.
Do you think any of that is that he is speaking to the American public? So if he came out and said, that guy's a monster, we're going to bomb him, it wouldn't go well, especially if he won.
Well,
what's the proper way to address it?
This is warmongering. You don't want to do that. You don't want to. And there's one Republican senator whose name I forgot, but he's. And then there's Joe Biden, who said it out in public. They called Putin a war criminal. What does that do to promote peace? Nothing. It takes us away from that. It doesn't move the needle in our favor one bit. They are political statements, and I've been saying this ever since I had my first interview in the media, that when politics dominates foreign policy, we're going to make wrong decisions.
Could you expand on that a little bit more? Because I think especially Americans think that foreign policy is politics.
No, I'm talking about party politics. When you say something that seems to resonate internally, but it doesn't really work well on the international stage. Doesn't. Particularly these threatening statements. Now, if you make a threat, in some instances, against, for instance, like real evildoers, and I'm not talking about a nation state, I'm talking about the terrorists, you make a threat and you follow through with that threat, that'll work, but don't threaten the nuclear power, for crying out loud.
Okay. That's what you meant when you were saying that it's also not helpful to be overly flattering. Like giving them a whole bunch of compliments isn't going to help us in the same way that giving them a whole bunch of insults would.
No, that what that does, it creates the impression in the American population that you're just being an idiot.
Okay. Okay. So is
I'm
that
not,
your
I'm not thinking that, but the American people, oh man, or it gives your political enemies to maintain that you're sort of in cahoots with these guys, and you're not doing a really good job covering up, keeping it secret. It makes you vulnerable politically for sure. So just shut up. Uh, so
Could I ask then, what is your opinion on what Kamala Harris has been stating? Because I think she's more of the "we're going to go with Ukraine, fight to the end" kind of rhetoric.
yeah, the answer I want to give you is a a term that was invented by President Eisenhower. It's called the military-industrial complex. Follow the money. Who is interested in keeping that war afloat? And the other answer is, I am no fan of Zelensky, and I tell you why. First of all, he is as corrupt as Ukraine was when it was known to be the most corrupt nation on the planet. He's playing the role as an ex actor. He's playing the role of his life, and I'm asking. If I met him, I would ask him, how many lives is that piece of land that Russia wants worth keeping? How many? How many innocent people have to continue, sit down and negotiate? What is it particularly that what Putin would bring Putin to the table is to be able to declare victory and get that piece of land that is mostly occupied by Russians and not Ukrainians. And then he would have to obviously agree to behave with civility in that new acquired land. There are ways to get this done. I'm not volunteering for that. I'm not qualified, but we have had negotiations during the latter part of the Cold War. Two arch enemies, Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev, managed to sit down and maintain the peace and reduce the threat of nuclear war to near zero at the time. It's possible, because the bottom line is, even dictators don't want to die unless they're like, radical believer in a certain religion or ideology. Then they think, they want to sacrifice themselves. But most people don't want to continue living.
Do you get the impression that someone like Putin is ideologically driven?
I believe very strongly that his drive is to create a legacy for himself. And the legacy is to become Vladimir the Great, with a monument right next to Peter the Great. He's a very strong narcissist. I'm not. This is a guess. I'm not a psychologist, but when you follow his appearances in the public realm, his bragging about athleticism, his riding on a horse without a saddle, half naked, to show what kind of a macho man he is. That's narcissistic behavior, right? And all the pomp and circumstance in Russia today. Sort of like, I'm not calling him Hitler. Hitler was Hitler, but it's the Nazis did the same stuff. So, and to become and remain a dictator, you have to be a narcissist. You have to believe in yourself. The moment you start with self-doubt, you're done. Okay.
So I think that obviously these foreign policy issues are maybe hard to say what the most important issue would be truly for any election, but it's somewhere between foreign policy because the possibility of World War III, nuclear war, all that, and then obviously domestic policy, since we don't have much of a country if we don't have borders, and there's debate around that. But I'm curious, since we sort of glossed over it, I feel like I got a good idea of some ideas about what you think about Trump, but we sort of glossed over Kamala. The only thing you said was that she followed the money. Are you saying that she's just whatever she needs to be to be elected?
Yeah, but this was in the context of foreign policy. So what I think about Ms. Harris is, I don't know if she knows what she's talking about. I mean, without a teleprompter, she talks a lot of nonsense. I can't follow her logic if there is any. And she would have to surround herself with highly competent advisors to implement what she high-level thinks she can do. And unfortunately, she has a history of staff leaving her in droves. So I don't know how she would function as the leader of the country. And it's more, never mind the ideology, never mind, all the giveaways that she's planning that are not feasible. Once you look at the feasibility, some of them are unconstitutional. Others will ruin the country, free this and free that, and free beer. She hasn't promised free beer yet. In Germany, that would work really well.
I've seen her policies on her website, and I went and I read them because I don't know where she was speaking, but I saw a clip where she said, I have 80 pages of policies. He doesn't have any. And I went and I read both people's policies. Trump's got like a top 20 list that say, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And they seem matter of fact. Defend the border. It doesn't exactly break down exactly what they're going to do, but you kind of understand that there's a plan to follow that. You're right, though. Harris was just giving away money, and then she says she's going to lower taxes for 100 million people at the same time.
Now, just recently, I think it was maybe started yesterday or the day before, she's now also focusing on giving away money to African-American men, which she had ignored for a while, and they're like now there's a percentage of them that are siding with Trump. So there's some, I've seen some statements where she specifically talks to African-American men, like more funds to deal with diseases that African-American men are more prone to than the rest of the population and stuff like that, or funding startups, and there's more men likely that men start companies and so forth. It's you've got to read between the lines. Yeah, the giveaways are stunning, and it started out with student loan forgiveness, which fundamentally is taking from the people who paid off their loans and paid taxes and giving to the people who weren't successful, and you're just getting a present. That's not fair. I thought they were all about fairness.
Yeah, that was annoying too. I lived in California when that happened, when they announced it, and I thought it was dumb. But then at the same time, I was like, if they're going to do it, I might as well apply. So I did.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I got accepted. I have the email that says I will be forgiven, and then they just never contacted me again because they couldn't get it through or something to do with that. But then they pushed it through anyway for like a fraction of the people. And then I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay, so now I'm doubly pissed. I didn't like the idea to begin with, and then you said I got it, the benefits of it too, and then took the benefits from me.
I have to admit it. If I got free money when everybody else gets free money, you think I would say no? Now, but if I'm in the medical profession and I make really, really good money, I'm not wanting anything. I'm taking care of my family. I have a nice house. I go on a vacation abroad every year. I would say, okay, no, give it to somebody else.
No, I think that's true. I think government programs that are designed to help people in need should go towards people who really are in need. And I'm not the expert on how you discern that or choose that, but lately it just seems everything they do is a loss.
Yeah, and that freewheeling spending. Um, I think the Inflation Reduction Act actually contributed to inflation. You spend money that you don't have, you print more. So this is economics 101. You learned this the first day in class.
So are you worried at all? Because it's really hard to follow the news on any side because, for the last year, we've been hearing that if Trump wins again, he's an existential threat to democracy. And then they say that as if the Republicans aren't saying it too. And I've heard that a lot recently. If Kamala wins, it's an existential threat. Do you think this is an existential election? I think that's not quite a political statement, but
I don't think either way. I think it will take a little longer to defeat the American spirit. There are still many, many good people around. I'm living in a bubble where, none of us are partisan politically, but we have common sense. So a lot of these people that are friends of mine are entrepreneurs, and that the pioneer spirit is still around, and it has been adopted by immigrants. A lot of immigrants came here because they were attracted by the ability to make something of their lives and not be subjected to like government restrictions all the time. So I think there's a danger we're going to go in the wrong direction, but I don't think it's existential.
okay. Well, that's good to hear. That gives me a bit of ease. 'Cause
Again, everything I tell you is based on my past, my experience, the experience I've had, and my observational skills. But I don't have data. Okay, so these are educated guesses. But I have a pretty good history with educated guesses since I started taking interviews on television as well as podcasts. I haven't been radically wrong yet. Now, it depends upon your definition what radically wrong is.
well, I could go down a whole path on that alone, because that's another area.
Let me just tell you one thing. I never claim to be an expert in anything that I have an opinion about, and that includes myself. I'm not an expert in myself either, because I have proven to myself that I was wrong.
You have a lot of experience with ideology, though, since you came up having left the generation of the Nazis, came up under the vision of the communists, and then lived in America and eventually chose America. I am curious, do you see rises of ideology in America that worry you in any specific area?
Well, all ideology is dangerous. And I tell you why. Ideology is a belief system that individuals adopt to the exclusion of everything else. So they become very, very fanatical about what could start out as a good cause, like save the whales or global warming or whatever, or keep the environment clean. These are all pretty noble ideologies, but let's say causes. Once they become ideologies, your thinking doesn't allow any contrary thoughts in anymore, and you lose your character as an individual, as a human individual. And then you become subject to being misled by the the leaders of these ideologies. So now we're talking again about little dictatorships developing. And since you lost your ability to think rationally and logically, you will follow them. And no matter what the ideology. And actually, I I taped a master class not too long ago where I talk about that, that kind of a thought that I just shared with you, and I'm convinced that educated guess is pretty much on the money. You can see it, you can watch it, you can see some of the crazies that are marching in the streets, or that are going to museums and throw paint on on paintings, on works of art, to protest global warming. That's insane.
Yeah, the
You
Just
do
Stop
some,
Oil group.
do something that actually helps clean up the environment. If you want to not burn any fuel, and you don't want to live off of electricity because it takes a lot of fuel to create electricity, then just like use less of it, to do something, but don't do damage and make a fool of yourself. But this is derangement that takes in, and a derangement is based on what is originally starts at a well-meaning good cause.
Well, your use of that word actually clicked with me really early on, because a cause is something that is sort of finite. It's a call to action. It's something immediate. It's like there was an oil spill. The cause is we're going to go clean the beach. And then there's something for the community to do and rally behind. But it seems you're saying that ideology is more, it's a conclusion about the world that everything has to fit into.
Exactly right. You said it better than I could have said it.
Being someone who's been undercover, who's been a spy, is there a way to tell that you're in an ideology, or what is the way to tell that maybe your cause is becoming one?
The only way to tell is you have to be told. And this is why I'm advising people to have a mentor. That could be a father figure, could even be a mother figure, or a good friend who you listen to, who has nothing but the best of your best interest in mind, and will tell you the truth in love. If you learn, have somebody like that, and not stop listening, then you might be alerted to the danger that you are about to subscribe to an ideology. So, and then here's my example. My father was, quite frankly, useless. He was 18 years old when World War II ended. He never had a chance to mature as a man. He married a very domineering woman, and probably smarter than him. And at the time when I could have used a mentor, particularly in college, when I could still have been influenced to question communism. I didn't have one. As a matter of fact, the reason for that was because I was doing so well in class. I had nothing but A's. I was on a pedestal. Everybody admired me, rather than telling me something. Wait a second. Think about this. Do a little research and see if that makes any sense. If I had had a functioning father figure or a mentor, I would have at least wound up telling the KGB, no way, I'm not going to do that.
Really? You think so?
Not because the ideology was wrong, but the cause, the task was ridiculously dangerous, and even my belief in communism would have not balanced that, and I would have said, no, I can do something for communism as a college professor. Okay, so it would have weakened my ideology enough to not try to sort of sacrifice at least my freedom for it. And there was a good chance I would go to jail, a very good chance.
for the viewers, since we're not doing such a biographical interview, could you tell me what your assignment was with the KGB? And I believe you stated before that you didn't know the full assignment when you went in.
That is correct. They never shared with me what the most important thing of my being in the United States was. And I found that out based on interviews that were given after the KGB was dissolved by two individuals who were at one point in charge of the directorate as illegals. And they stated quite clearly the most important thing for us illegals being in the United States was us being in the United States. And in hindsight, I put two and two together. Towards the end of the Cold War, there were spy wars going on between the CIA and the KGB. And other than us illegals, all the spies were diplomats. And when they caught a diplomat doing something that smelled like espionage, we, the United States, would kick out a KGB spy. And then they would retaliate. And it went back and forth, maybe a whole team of spies. And then the retaliation was the same number. And in that time, there were two moles in U.S. espionage organizations. There's Aldrich Ames, who was in the CIA, and he was involved in planning anti-Soviet activities. Did a lot of damage because he was an extremely valuable agent for the KGB. And the other one was Robert Hansen. He was in the FBI, and he also did anti-Soviet stuff. They were by far the most valuable agents that the KGB had in NATO countries. God forbid, and Andropov was worried about diplomatic relations being broken up altogether. And who would have been left over to work with those valuable agents, the moles, us illegals? I was never prepared. I was never told what I just shared with you. I don't know why. Pretty stupid. They very often kept things from me that would have helped me make better decisions, because I could never ask somebody, is that the right thing to do? So
you weren't installed in a position here in the U.S. government. You were domestic.
Not at all.
So did they enter? Do you know if they entered the country the same way you did? Like, did they have the same start as you, or were they like, you're going to go and immediately have this position?
I don't know, because they were all together, and that was information that came out of KGB archives. In the the latter period of the Cold War, the KGB trained 8 of us. It is not clear how many actually were launched, and it's not clear how many actually had to abort the mission. I am friends with a colleague of mine, also a German. He and his wife were the original Americans, because they came to the U.S. as a couple. And their only task was, and they were told, their only task was to just live as Americans. And also, with regard to sending illegals over, the majority of us illegals came through a second country. Remember in 2010, you may remember that, or you may have heard of it, the FBI arrested four married couples that were illegals. They all came either through Canada or Brazil. So in countries where it was easier to gain citizenship using forged documents, and then they would immigrate legally, but still were illegal in this country. I was an exception to the moment that, because of my ability to speak American English with just a touch of an accent, the moment I set foot on this country, I pretended to have been born in New Jersey, because Jack Barsky, whose identity we stole, was born in New Jersey. He passed away at the age of 11, and the KGB was able to get a notarized, an authentic copy of his birth certificate. One other thing with regard to the task, I was tasked with one thing that was important to them: get to know as many people as possible and and operate as a spotter, suggest which ones either have access to secrets or could eventually have access to secrets. Particularly, I was, and then profile them and give name and address and how they could be approached. I have no idea whether they were able to successfully recruit any one of those because they didn't share that with me either.
But you did find people that fit their...
Particularly when I went to college here. In 1986, the last time I visited Moscow, I was approached by somebody who was involved in industrial espionage. And he asked me to if I can get my hands on either hardware or software that is on the do not export list that they wanted me to steal, so to speak, maybe buy. And I stole one piece of software that was very, very popular in American corporations in those days. But I doubt that it was useful because it was used by corporations to operate in a capitalist system, and it wouldn't have worked in a communist system.
Oh.
So I'm very glad that this couldn't have done any damage.
So while you were on assignment here, how did you ingrain yourself in local communities? Did you have friends, and how did you compartmentalize who you were?
Yeah, the first few years I was very careful to get close socially with others because I was well aware that I wasn't Americanized. I spoke English as well as I speak it now. I had learned a lot of stuff about the United States, who the Yankees were, and and the football teams, and I watched a lot of TV, and I was up to date with culture and television, but I had no history. And I didn't know how to behave like an American. And I found that out quickly just by observing. So my first 3 years, I didn't even date somebody. I was afraid of women to be more in tune in the fact that I didn't actually appear to be real. Okay? Now, the accent was okay. In New York, everybody has an accent, so that wasn't a big problem. But I lucked out in the sense that my first job, I worked as a bike messenger. And in between routes, I waited in the office. There was an office where we hung out before we were sent out to either pick up or deliver. And I just listened to the other bike messengers. And it was very safe for me because these were all like transients. They typically had a job maybe for 6 months and then they went on to something else. They weren't curious about me because I was just able to listen, and that convinced me that I had a lot to learn.
That's an interesting point you make. Is that you noticed Americans weren't really interested in you?
Yeah, those Americans weren't interested in me. When I mingled with people that were, such as when I started college, I was able to handle myself. There was some things I still was not aware of, and this is the one thing that I only found out lately. There's a movie called Inglourious Bastards. Are you familiar with that movie? Where there's a scene where somebody an American impersonates a German, and he counts on his fingers. And he starts counting like this, one, and I can't really do that. We start counting with the thumb. So I still had vulnerabilities, but when I was in college, particularly, I went to City University. Probably half my fellow students were from another country. It was like the United Nations. And then when I started my job as a programmer in a large company, I felt very certain that I would pass. Even that was not 100%. And I give you this one example that was an eye-opener. So I had a good friend there who was a Cuban immigrant, and he was a really smart guy, and we became good friends because we complemented each other. He had the ideas, and I was very good at implementing them. And one day, he took me into a conference room, and he said, you know, Jack, I really love you, and it's great working with you. But I got to tell you, everybody in this office thinks you're an asshole. I said, huh? And then he boiled it down to my communication style. Germans are very direct, very critical. And the part of Germany where I grew up also was very negative. So I would tell people, well, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this, without them asking me and not being diplomatic enough. So I I figured this out. He opened my eyes, and I don't communicate like a German anymore unless I'm very passionate. But I make sure that I do not offend anybody, because that's meaningless. It actually diminishes the opinion that you may have, even if it's a strong opinion. So yeah, it took a long time, and now the Germans think I'm a little bit off, and I take pride in that.
So there was never, or was there ever a point where the version of you that you had, that, like who you really were, did that come into conflict with who you had to pretend to be?
Good question. No, I was highly compartmentalized, and I can tell you that I had proof of that even while I was compartmentalized. I'm not anymore, because I was able to reconcile both the German and the American. But every 2 years, 4 times during my 10 years, the Jack Barsky went back to Germany and had contact with his German family. And then, when I was in Germany, I instinctively reacted to when somebody behind me called me by my German name. I was back to the German self. And the moment I came back to the United States, I was home again. And there's one time, it was only after my second visit, so I was in the U.S. for 4 years. The moment I had I came back in the fall. It was the World Series, and I was eager to find out how the Yankees were doing. German wouldn't have worried about that. It was, and the compartmentalization still has an after effect. If somebody were to walk in here and said something in German, my English would be blocked.
Oh, interesting. So they cancel each other out.
I can't translate very well, because apparently the connection of the neurons that have stored German and the neurons that have stored English have stored English is very weak. So I could not write my book. It was translated in German. I had to use a translator. And one thing was real funny. I had come off of a talk on the internet with a German fellow, and my son calls me, and I start talking to him in German. I wasn't aware of it. And he kept on yelling, Jack! And no, Dad. He said, Dad. And I kept on saying, was ist los? Was hast du denn? And I mean, what's going on? Eventually he said, you're speaking German. So compartmentalization, that's the only way you survive that kind of a situation. When to credibly impersonate another person. And so, this is like how sociopaths and psychopaths operate. And I'm not proud to have been in that company. I did not use that compartmentalization to purposely damage other people. I know that I did damage to my family. I may have done other damage, but I'm not aware of that. I didn't do it purposely. And the one time I did do it on purpose was because I thought I was serving a very noble cause. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation.
Right, because there's also I have people in my family that are part of the military here, and not always, but I try to have conversations with them sometimes about, while they have pride in what they do, and on the local level, they can be a hero to the people who are around them, to their battle buddies, to the people they have to keep safe. I always wonder, do they think about the broader levels that they don't have direct control over, say their orders or what war they're taking part in, but the fact that they are still taking part in it? Like, I don't know if I'd consider joining the U.S. military right now, because I don't want to be part of whatever war we're going to start, because it seems like we're not really chasing America's security, but America's interests. And I just wonder if that ever played on your mind.
Did not, because I never touched a weapon.
Okay.
Okay, I have no weapons training at all. Violence was not talked about. I got some martial arts training defensively, just in case I'm attacked by a would-be robber, street crime. I don't think I would have agreed to like violence, to violent behavior, because I can kill instincts, but I'm not wired to hunt and shoot animals, for instance. I never had that urge to do that. The only moving animal I ever killed was a sparrow with a BB gun.
Did you regret it? Did you regret it?
No. You see, sparrows were considered like a nuisance. There were too many of them. But now I wouldn't do it anymore. I might kill a dangerous snake, though.
Fair enough.
Especially if it runs around in a public park, for instance.
Well, let me go back, because
not
Bambi. Fair enough. You mentioned that you had a German family as well, and then you would only see them every 2 years.
Yeah.
Was that part of the compartmentalization as well when you were in the U.S.?
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%. Now, I was married to, and Chelsea, Chelsea's mother. I liked her for quite a long time, but I never loved her the way I loved my German wife. So that was one of the reasons that I was looking forward to living the rest of my life with her. I never stopped loving her, and I also wouldn't have left her for another woman, but I left her for Chelsea, for a child who I loved, who needed my love more, who absolutely needed it more, because her mom had only 4 years of formal education. Without me, Chelsea would have grown up in poverty. And poverty in New York is very ugly. Was and is. It was, and it's in big cities in the U.S. It's very ugly, and there's a lot of crime, and there's drug addiction and all that. And I was aware of that, and I couldn't possibly think about leaving this child exposed to that. It's very difficult to work your way out of a slum in the United States.
And Chelsea, just to clarify, that's your daughter that you had in the United States.
Yes, that's my first. I have another one, but then she came much later. Chelsea was 18 months when I had to make the decision as to whether to follow the orders of the KGB to go back home, because they honestly believed that I was about to be arrested. They shared that with me via shortwave radio. They told me to just execute the emergency procedure, go to Canada, and then ring the bell at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, and they would get me out of the country. I guarantee you, they meant this, even though they may not have cared about me, but they cared about me being arrested, because once you have an agent like me in jail, you got to get him out, or else you can't recruit anybody else. Okay?
Oh.
That's not that easy to, yes. So you have to now set up a valuable target, an American target, put them in jail, and then you have a prisoner exchange.
And this goes back to the spy warfare you were talking about.
Oh, absolutely. That's and so I am certain that something spooked them. And then when they were spooked that way, they said, "We got to abort. This guy has to come home." And I told them no. And the people always ask me, "So how did you get away with it?" So I'm volunteering the answer. I told them that I had HIV/AIDS. That was a death sentence in those days. And they certainly didn't want to have somebody with that highly infectious disease on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So
I've heard you say that before, and that's so wild because I think that's almost a joke now to use AIDS to get out of something. I think you might have originated that, but it worked in your case.
that was not a joke in those days. I mean, they actually went to my German family and told them that I had AIDS, and my German family, and that I died from AIDS. That's what they said, even though I hadn't. And so, but the German register where the national register where they, keep track of births, weddings, marriages, deaths, has me die in 1988, period. As a friend of mine, a schoolmate of mine, has access to that, and she found that Albrecht Dittrich, that's my German name, died in 1988. So it was a death sentence, and it was not a joke. And it shouldn't be joked. You should not be used for joking either, because it's still a nasty disease, and it's mostly preventable. But you know what? I still don't wish it on anybody, even though it's maybe self-inflicted, but I wouldn't wish this to anybody. As you may know, I became a Christian, and we are asked and told to love everybody, and that may be hard sometimes, but it's about what's in here, not whether the person that we're supposed to love is worth the love. So if we dish out love selectively, that becomes rather selfish.
Well,
Sorry, I wasn't trying to evangelize you, but
that's perfect. I appreciate the transition because I wanted to actually ask you about your faith, and I have that on my list. But then I was like, how do I transition from AIDS to faith?
I hacked your brain.
Yeah, exactly. What was the religious setting or zeitgeist in Germany and then under communism? Because wasn't it all kind of one way?
Oh, absolutely. I give you a very interesting example. First of all, I was told from day one, the only gods that are acceptable were the gods out of Greece, and the Roman Empire, and they were obviously legends. They weren't real. Marxism clearly denies the existence of any god and calls religion the opium for the masses. And we heard this from the moment we entered kindergarten. My parents, interestingly enough, one set of my grandparents was religious, because I know this because they had three girls. They named them Ruth, Eva, and Judith. These are names from the Bible. Now, the word God in a Christian sense, I never heard this in my family. So we had Christmas, and we didn't know about Jesus. We celebrated a pagan Christmas. Easter, same thing. There was no cross in Easter.
What does that actually mean, a pagan Christmas and Easter?
Pagan? Oh, that means, Christmas trees were developed by German tribes. The Feast of Light, so to speak, the change over into the new year. They got the date a little bit wrong, but and then we had a Santa Claus. What did we call him? Father Nicholas or something like that. So it was just like a guy with a beard and with a rucksack who distributed the presents and said the German version of ho ho ho.
But there was just no religion in it, so it was
absolutely none.
Okay.
I found in my grandparents' home, I once found a copy of the Bible, and curious as I was, I started reading it. But I read it from page 1, and I got rather bored rather quickly. You cannot, as a newcomer to the Bible, you cannot read it like that. You need to start with the New Testament if you want to be entertained and stay interested. So, and one more thing, if you were a believing Christian, it was very hard to have a career. I I had one classmate in college who openly confessed that he was a Catholic. And I had influence. I had influence as a student representative of the government of the section chemistry. There were one student representative, there were professors, there were administrators, and they made decisions. and I got them to make an exception for my friend Klaus after interviewing him and asking him if our country were ever invaded by NATO, would he fight on our behalf? And he said yes, as that was good enough for me. But clearly, he didn't try to evangelize me because he knew that would have caused him to be punished. His career would be over. And real believing Christians were rare. And the East German secret police made a note of them. If you were a Christian, you were seen to go to worship on a Sunday. The Stasi, East German secret police, had an entry in your records, and there was also a Christian party, but that was led by communists in disguise. Okay, and there were some pastors who actually snitched and betrayed their own congregation. So it was all. See, the East Germans were the communist rulers were very, very smart. Because after World War II, there was a bit of a revival. There was a spirituality that came up. And Germany had a very strong Christian tradition. So what they did, rather than forbidding Christianity, they choked it and corrupted it and co-owned it. It worked really well. The same way, by the way, Vladimir Putin has made a deal with the Christian Orthodox Church in Russia. They're working hand in glove.
I actually just interviewed somebody who he is a minister, but his take on it is that he doesn't really like religion. And he thinks a lot of people who are religious don't really have proper faith because they basically, as long as they're following their rules or within their sect, then they're happy. And they don't, and especially in modern days, he went on a bit with me about how the 10 Commandments aren't really believed by most faithful people.
He is right. That doesn't make any organized church bad, because I here in Texas I've visited quite a few where the preaching is very solid. It's Bible centric. But I belong to a church where the pastor, I don't know if he coined that phrase, but he despises churchianity. That's
a good term.
That, just go to church on a weekend and then go back home. We actually we are a small church with 60 members, and you can't just join. You're being interviewed to be told what we believe in, and if you don't believe in it, you and that's all Bible centered. If you don't believe it, it makes you uncomfortable. A lot of people say, "No, I can't come." So it's 60 people, and I joined about a year ago. I'm getting to know every one of them, and we're very supportive of one another. This is how Christianity first started. They met in house churches, and the mega churches are pretty much, I believe, all very, very damaging to the faith. They're more into entertainment, and and once you have another one of an established hierarchy, that I'm not saying that they're evil on purpose. I'm not saying that they're bad people.
I will. I think they're pretty bad people who run those mega churches.
Some are, but I won't name any names. But to maintain the hierarchy, you have to become political in some way, right?
I think, but that's to your point though, is you shouldn't need to maintain the hierarchy. It shouldn't get that big. I like that you said you go to a local church and it's kept fairly small. I think also to your point about churchianity and that it hurts to say it, but like that might be most people, because it's evidenced by the fact that whenever there's a sacrifice for faith, people don't show up.
Yeah. And there's a lot of pastors who are afraid to have an opinion about what's going on in the country in the secular realm because they're afraid to lose their 401, their tax exempt status.
Oh, I wasn't as familiar with that. I know that there's issues with churches and pastors who don't want to say anything that they feel has become politicized because they'll lose people. But I don't know.
Yeah, that too. But they also could, they would be vulnerable to losing the tax exempt status.
I would love to know more about that. Maybe there's somebody you know
Yeah.
I could interview on that topic specifically.
You should interview my pastor, and I'll tell you why. He's a very interesting person in his own right. His name is Christian Ray Flores. Christian Ray grew up in the Soviet Union, and he did well as a student, and then he decided to pick up music, and he did really well. He became, I can send you a couple of videos that confirms his claim. He became the #1 pop star in Russia, performed in front of several thousand people, and lived the life of a pop star. That was when the Soviet Union had disappeared, and he wasn't. The country that he lived in was Russia. And then he felt this whole, he got sick and tired of that life. And he met an American evangelist and became a Christian. He started preaching in big churches, and he's now in the United States, and he's keeping his church purposely small. When he was a pop star, by the way, he composed and made a song called My Generation. That became the battle hymn for the Yeltsin campaign when Yeltsin, ran for president. And it got a lot of young people to vote for Yeltsin. But, Yeltsin turned out to be a dud. Anyway, it was interesting that in those days, American evangelists were allowed to come to the United States. And I actually met the person who contacted Christian and told him the hard truth about God. That you asked Christian, that was very painful. But he actually was so focused on changing his life that he stopped having intimate relationships with all the women that were throwing themselves at him. That's hard for a young man.
Especially when the women are showing up. Yeah. Well, I would love to talk with them. We'll have to connect that behind the scenes. Since we are coming up on our time, and I appreciate you giving me your time today, I had one more question for you. And it is, if there was one person that you could sit down and have a conversation with from the Cold War era on either side, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Hold on, I just got to remember the name. Oleg Gordievsky. He was a mole for MI6 in the KGB, and he did one thing that prevented a nuclear war. He notified he influenced the KGB to not take too seriously, and I don't know exactly how he did it too seriously. There was a NATO maneuver that was called Able Archer, and it made the Soviet leadership think that they were about to invade. NATO was about to invade, and they were ready to launch nuclear weapons. And the thing is, he was operating as a KGB agent in England, and he also convinced the British to just pull back. And somehow, and the reason that he's so interesting, he was called back. Not like me, he was called back because there was a suspicion that he was unclean, and he was not arrested. But he
unclean.
Was watched. Unclean, in other words, that he might actually turn double agent.
Oh, okay.
They didn't have proof of it, so but they suspected him to be not clean, and And so he was not allowed to operate as a KGB agent. He was watched, and he managed to escape. There's a book written about him. It's called The Spy and the Traitor. It's him juxtaposing him with an agent in MI6 who worked, and whose name every time I think about him I forget about him. But The Spy and the Traitor. It's a real good book. The juxtaposition is an MI6 agent who betrayed England and wound up actually was able to flee. He was under some suspicion, but he managed to run away and live out his life in the Soviet Union. So Gordievsky would be because he could have chosen to do what I did. He could have said, no, I got to stay here now because it's getting too dicey. No, he went back because he thought his job wasn't finished. And then he managed to flee, and that just his escape over the Finnish border is a story that is as good as anything in a movie about espionage. He was in more danger than I was and am, because the biggest crime in the eyes of a Russian government or the Soviet government you could commit is to betray your home country. A Russian betraying Russia was much more of a felony, and that is one of the reasons that when 60 Minutes interview aired and somebody became aware of my existence, that I felt relatively safe because I didn't betray Russia. I wasn't a Russian who betrayed the country. So I'm not saying that I'm 100% safe, but the danger for me to happen something in the U.S. or in any NATO country is very, very low. Now, if you promised me $1 million to visit Moscow, I would decline, because it's very easy to fall out of a window. And what Vladimir Putin, what he likes doing the best in terms of sending messages to people that he wants to send messages to is threats. And he wouldn't have to say a word. And the Western press, picks up that Jack Barsky had an accident. Who Vladimir is scaring with that? Everybody else who may consider defecting or becoming double agents, because we're going to get you no matter what.
I see your point because that would carry on, especially it'd be like, oh, he's not even a spy for the current regime. Yeah. That's how long it carries. Yeah, so I see your point.
And I haven't hacked Vladimir's mind, but I've studied him, and that would be right up his alley to do that. And you don't have to say a word. You don't have to even put it in the Soviet press that this American died an unfortunate death. The Western press, well, you would just leak it into the Western press to somebody innocent,
Well, man, that's a somber note to leave on. We can't just leave on that. We got to ask something lighthearted.
No, you got to ask me one question that I was asked once, and I was not prepared for it, but I came up with the best answer. I gave a presentation at Microsoft headquarters, and it was pretty early in my speaking career. And the young lady at the Q&A, she raised her hand and asked me, "So, what is the most important lesson you're taking away from that life that you lived?" And I had to think about it for a little bit, and then I spontaneously came up with the answer. 3 words: love conquers all. Because it conquered my fear, my rational decision that I had to go back to Germany, because even if I stay with my daughter, I could be arrested, and I'm no good to her either. So I could have rationalized, saying, I got to go, with tears in my eyes. The love actually was much stronger than that. And so, and the other question, and people ask me, or I volunteer that the most important love word in my vocabulary is the word love. It's if you learn how to love, truly love, including yourself, by the way, you live a better life. It's just more satisfying and more fulfilling to live that way. And I'm getting close. I still have a little bit of air with regard to loving myself. I've been told by a couple of really good friends, but I got to work on that.
Jack, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
You're welcome, and it's always good to have a real intelligent conversation that allows me to go a little bit more into detail than 10 minutes on cable TV.